There we go. Okay, so 5.8 notes is working with quadratic formula. So our goal is to use quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. And not only are we going to solve them, but we're going to find the exact solution. So use quadratic formula to find exact solutions to a quadratic equation. So we've already found a couple other ways to solve quadratic equations. What was one of those methods? Who can tell me? Or two methods we've learned so far. We learned one in 5.5 and one in 5.6. Solve by something or solve by something? Solve by graphing is one of them. What's the other one? By factoring. Yes, graphing and factoring are your first two options. This is your option when neither of those work, or like when we were graphing, remember sometimes the x-intercept was between two values, like between 1 and 2. We didn't know exactly where it was. The quadratic formula will allow us to find those exact solutions. Also, it will allow us to find the complex solutions. So if you look at the graph, it'll say no solution. However, there is a solution. It just means that it's complex. So our quadratic formula, what it is if we're given ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. The important part here is it has to equal 0 for this to work. Okay, the equation has to be set equal to 0. Then you can identify the a, the b, and the c. And once you have those identified, what you'll do is you'll plug it into the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is, I'm going to sing it because maybe it will come back to you when I sing it. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, do you remember it?
Nothing.
Like, does it ring a bell? Even if you don't say, oh yeah, I have that memorized. Does that ring a bell?
It looks familiar, but not the same. I remember that from last year.
Yeah, I remember.
You didn't do it in geometry. You would have done it in Algebra 1.
I remember like hand clap. It went with hand clap or something. Like plus or minus.
I remember that from Algebra 1.
Yeah, yep. Algebra 1 is when you guys would have learned it. Okay. So, the discriminant, okay? We're going to kind of talk about the different parts of it, and then what we'll do is we'll actually go through an example. So the discriminant is the value of what's underneath the radical. The discriminant and radical being the square root sign. So the discriminant is this part right here. So your discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. If you do this part first, it makes it a little bit easier. Because as soon as you know what that value is, then you can say, okay, I know what my end solution will need to look like. If this value is positive, okay, you have two different options. Can you take the square root of it? So if you had like the square root of 16 or the square root of 25 or the square root of 36, when you take the square root of that, you get a nice number, correct? Okay, so if this number is a perfect square, then our answer is going to be 2. They will be real because since it's positive, I can take the square root. And because it's because it'll be a nice integer number, that means when I plug it in to take this number, add a number to it, divided by 2 times the number, you're going to be able to get a rational number. It'll be able to be expressed as a fraction. So 2 real rational roots or solutions or zeros, whatever it's asking for, that's what we end up with. Okay? If it's positive, but let's say it's like the square root of 10. Okay? If you were to type that into your calculator, you get this really long, nasty decimal. That is irrational. So when you have to do negative b plus or minus a nasty number divided by 2 times That's a nasty number. So what we'd say is they are real because you can take the square root of 10. You can take the square root of 12. They just don't end up being nice answers. So we call them irrational roots or solutions. They're real, but they're just irrational versus rational. If the discriminant, so that value underneath the square root sign, is 0, what is the square root of 0? 0. So the problem there is, how many solutions do you have? When you take the square root of 0, how many answers are there? 1. Whereas if you took the square root of 25, your answers are positive or negative 5, right? Which is how we come up with 2 for both of those ones. Okay, but if you're taking the square root of 0, you only have 1. It is real because 0 is a real number. Okay, and these are going to be rational because you'll have negative b plus or minus 0. So you'll have a number divided by whatever 2a number is. So a number divided by a number is a rational number. It's just a fraction. So 2 real rational roots or solutions, however you want to put that. Or I should say 1. No s at the end of that one. If it is negative, what do you get when you take the square root of a negative number? What's the square root of negative 25? It's positive or negative 5i, yes. So then when you have that I in there, it's a complex number, right? So here, when you have plus or minus the square root of a negative number, okay, you're going to have 2 complex numbers, or 2 complex roots, or solutions, or whatever word you want to use for that. So, the first thing that we are going to do here is we have an example. Okay? How do we find the value of the discriminant? Well, we're going to use that b squared minus 4ac.